The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and damp earth, a suffocating weight that pressed on my chest as I stood near my wife's casket. People whispered, their words dripping with false sympathy. But I could hear the undercurrent beneath each polite phrase, the subtle, eager curiosity about what she had left behind. My relatives hovered, shifting from one foot to the other, sneaking glances at me, and I knew exactly what they were thinking. My aunt commented on how life goes on, and my uncle chuckled about how someone had to inherit the royalties from her small but surprisingly profitable music catalog. I forced a smile, a mask of shared grief, while my mind calculated silently. They had no idea that the $280,000 in royalties and the Cape Breton house were already securely mine. I caught my son staring up at me, eyes wide, uncertain, and he whispered, almost too quietly, "Dad, what did Mom leave us?" My heart tightened, not with fear but with a quiet, resolute thrill. What they didn't know was, I was the one with the power. As I drove away from the cemetery later that day, the images of my childhood flashed unbidden in my mind. Birthdays forgotten, my accomplishments shrugged off, my successes quietly minimized while my cousin's achievements were paraded and celebrated. I remembered the time my aunt loudly praised my older brother for a modest promotion while barely glancing at me, and the sting of my parents' hollow congratulations that felt more like obligations than pride. Even now, I could feel the familiar knot of hurt and mistrust tightening in my chest. My mother had always been the quiet protector, her presence soft but firm, shielding me from the subtle cruelties of our family. And now, after her death, her legacy whispered in shadows, a modest stack of royalty checks, contracts tucked away, and a Cape Breton house whose keys were mine alone. I felt a strange mix of grief and cautious excitement, like standing at the edge of a cliff with a secret advantage no one else suspected. Every word spoken at the funeral, every sly glance, now carried a deeper weight. They thought they understood the story. They didn't. At the memorial gatherings that followed, I found myself scanning the room more than listening. Every handshake, every forced smile, every carefully timed laugh spoke volumes about who was angling for favor and who was desperate to stake their claim. My cousins clustered together, whispering in corners, while my aunts tried to assert dominance by offering platitudes and reminding everyone of family history. I noticed the subtle jockeying for position at the head of the buffet, the polite interruptions during eulogies, the way they lingered just a second too long by me, hoping for a hint of insight. FOMO clung to them like a second skin. They wanted the power, the acknowledgement, the inheritance they assumed was waiting for them. And yet, as I observed, I felt the thrill of being invisible yet fully in control, like a player who knows all the moves before the game begins. Beneath my grief, a quiet, simmering sense of revenge took root, patient and precise, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Weeks after the memorial, I was going through some of my wife's old files, the ones she insisted I keep locked in the study. Among the bills and letters, I found a stack of documents that made my heart skip. Royalty statements totaling $280,000 and the deed to the Cape Breton house. All in her name, but with instructions that they be handled by me. A rush of conflicting emotions hit me. Grief, relief, and a careful, calculating thrill. I thought of my son, innocent and trusting, and wrestled with whether to tell him now or wait until the family's intentions were clear. My wife's voice echoed in my memory. They'll try to take everything, but you must protect him and yourself. Be patient. I remembered her caution against relatives who never truly celebrated our joys without an ulterior motive. The tension thickened one afternoon when my cousin stopped by unannounced, smiling too brightly, asking probing questions about the property and royalties. I kept my expression neutral, letting the silence stretch, knowing that every word I withheld was a small victory. I started planting small, seemingly innocent seeds. At the next family gathering, I casually mentioned considering some renovations on the Cape Breton house, hinting at potential plans without giving away any specifics. I might turn it into a little retreat for us someday, I said, letting the words hang just long enough for the envious glances to settle in. The subtle flickers of greed were unmistakable. The way my uncle's eyes lingered a beat too long, how my cousin's smile faltered, trying to mask curiosity. I felt a quiet satisfaction in watching them scramble for scraps of information that didn't exist. Then came the moment that truly shifted the balance. One afternoon, I caught my cousin attempting to log into the joint account to find out more about the royalties, thinking I wouldn't notice. I intercepted her with calm precision, redirecting her questions with vague answers while keeping full control of the documents and funds. That small reversal of power, almost imperceptible to anyone else, sent a thrill through me. They were beginning to understand, though none of them knew just how carefully I was orchestrating this. Family dinners became minefields of subtle tension. Plates clinked, laughter echoed, but beneath the surface, every conversation was a test, every compliment a veiled attempt to pry. My relatives were relentless, leaning in with casual questions about property, royalties, or what my wife had really left behind. I kept my tone measured, calm, allowing the greed and impatience to show on their faces while I revealed nothing. My son, unaware of the stakes, asked quietly from across the table, "Dad, did Mom leave us anything special?" The innocence in his voice struck me like a lightning bolt. I forced a gentle smile and said nothing more than, "We have each other, and that's what matters." The contrast between their obvious desire and my quiet, unwavering control was almost delicious. They shifted nervously, trying to catch glimpses of what I was withholding. Empathy welled up in me. Not just for my son, whose curiosity was pure, but for myself, standing firm amid a tide of greed and entitlement. Each probing glance they cast my way only strengthened the simmering resolve to protect what was rightfully ours. The lawyer's office was cramped and sterile, the faint smell of polished wood and paper cutting through the tension in the air. I held the minor legal form in my hands, a simple document that seemed innocuous enough on the surface, but I knew my relatives were watching, waiting for a slip, a hint, anything that would allow them to seize control prematurely. Their eyes flitted over me, each glance filled with expectation and thinly veiled entitlement. My fingers tightened around the pen as anger and calculation surged through me. Every word they'd whispered at dinners, every sly question they'd asked, replayed in my mind. I imagined the consequences if I faltered, the royalties claimed, the Cape Breton house manipulated, my son left vulnerable to their greed. Then it happened. My cousin, too eager, too careless, muttered aloud their plan to approach the bank and claim the royalties before the paperwork was even finalized. The words hung in the air, a careless confession that left me both alarmed and quietly exhilarated. I smiled under my breath, knowing this mistake had just given me an upper hand. They didn't realize they'd surrendered. It was a quiet morning when I discovered my cousin had taken it upon herself to contact contractors, assuming she could start making decisions about the Cape Breton property. She didn't realize that every move she made was being tracked, every email and call carefully monitored. I stepped in with measured calm, presenting alternative plans and schedules that subtly undermined her authority without revealing the full extent of my control. She protested, insisting she was just helping, but I stayed patient, letting her frustration grow while I quietly reinforced my ultimate decisions. Watching her fumble, believing she had influence, filled me with a cautious satisfaction. This small victory was more than about property. It was a lesson in patience, strategy, and precision. I could feel the tension rising, a coil tightening in the room that mirrored the one in my chest. They thought they were in control, but every misstep only highlighted my foresight. The anticipation of the larger payoff, the moment when the full scope of my power would be undeniable, grew heavier with every passing day. At another family gathering, the atmosphere buzzed with self-importance and whispered boasts. My uncle casually mentioned the house in Cape Breton, hinting he couldn't wait to see how it might be used, while my aunt laughed about the royalties, speculating on lavish vacations and investments they assumed were theirs by default. I nodded politely, offering no confirmation, letting their assumptions hang in the air. My cousin chimed in, her voice tight with eagerness. "I'm sure you'll have to share some of that, won't you?" I smiled faintly, saying nothing, watching the flush of realization creep across their faces as the words settled into silence. Each comment, each boast, became a mirror of their greed, and I let it reflect back without ever confirming a thing. The unspoken dominance was mine. They were desperate to uncover the truth, but I remained a calm, impenetrable center. The humiliation was subtle but absolute. They were exposed in their entitlement while I held all the power quietly, savoring the growing tension and knowing the real reveal was still to come. It was during the family brunch, a gathering that had been tinged with curiosity and quiet competition for weeks. I leaned back in my chair, letting the chatter drift around me, observing as my relatives continued to boast and speculate, each eager to assert some imagined claim. Then slowly, deliberately, I spoke. About the royalties and the Cape Breton house. I let my words linger, giving them just enough space to lean in, to anticipate a confession that would favor them. Everything is being managed exactly as Mom intended. And yes, I have full control. The color drained from their faces, eyes widened, murmurs died mid-word, and for the first time, the room fell silent. Not from grief, not from ceremony, but from the shock of being completely outmaneuvered. My cousin opened her mouth, searching for an objection, but no words could undo the reality. I watched their faces twist through disbelief, frustration, and finally recognition. Every sneaky glance, every subtle manipulation they had attempted had been met with calm foresight on my part. They never suspected, never imagined, and now, quietly, I reveled in the satisfaction of the reveal. They never saw it coming. It didn't take long for the main culprit to act. My cousin, emboldened by weeks of subtle boasts and half-truths, cornered me at the next family event, a smug smile plastered on her face. "You know, it'd be so much easier if you just handed over some of the royalties," she said, her tone dripping with false familiarity. I let her words hang in the air, studying her carefully, feeling the pulse of anticipation. Calmly, I responded, outlining the house plans and royalty schedules in detail, enough to demonstrate complete authority, without raising my voice or showing anger. I let the crowd witness it, her face slowly falling as the realization hit that I had anticipated every move, controlled every step, and held every advantage. There was no need for shouting or humiliation. The truth alone dismantled her arrogance. Murmurs rippled through the gathering as other relatives looked on, silently acknowledging the shift. The power reversal was complete, precise, and morally satisfying. In that moment, justice was served. Not with cruelty, but with calm, undeniable authority. The relief and pride I felt were mirrored in my son's wide-eyed admiration, and I knew the lesson had landed. Greed never wins over patience and intelligence. That evening, after the last of the relatives had left, I sat with my son in the quiet of the living room, the soft hum of the heater filling the space. He looked at me, eyes curious and trusting, and asked again about what his mother had left behind. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle before I spoke. Slowly, gently, I explained the royalties, the Cape Breton house, and the reason I had kept it all hidden until the right time. His face lit up, a mix of wonder, relief, and awe, and I felt a swell of pride at his reaction. Outside, the echoes of our earlier gatherings lingered in my mind, cousins fuming over their failed attempts, family members reflecting silently on their behavior. The karmic balance had shifted subtly but unmistakably. I realized that protecting what was ours, guiding my son, and allowing natural consequences to unfold had brought a satisfaction far deeper than any confrontation could. In that quiet, heartfelt moment, grief softened, wisdom crystallized, and the bond between us strengthened, leaving me calm, triumphant, and profoundly at peace. Alone in the study that evening, I let the silence settle around me, a soft reminder of all that had passed. The grief of losing my wife still lingered, but alongside it came clarity, a calm understanding of what truly mattered: love, patience, and the quiet power of integrity. I thought back on the chaos of the past weeks, the whispered schemes, the greedy glances, the constant tension, and contrasted it with the present. Here I was, steady and in control, having navigated each subtle challenge with careful thought, protecting my son and honoring my wife's legacy. The relatives' envy and scheming now seemed distant, almost pitiful, while the sense of moral triumph I felt was profound and unshakable. Life would continue, messy and unpredictable, but we were safe, empowered, and prepared. In that quiet moment, I understood that true strength was not in proving them wrong loudly, but in keeping what was ours, guiding my son wisely, and moving forward with dignity. The emotional closure settled in like a soft warmth, steady and enduring. As I watched the last echoes of the day fade, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. The battles had been fought not with anger or confrontation, but with patience, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Every whispered expectation, every subtle manipulation, had been met with careful thought, and in the end, justice revealed itself naturally. My son sat beside me, unaware of the full depth of what had occurred, but basking in the safety and love that now surrounded us. The relatives' greed and scheming had unraveled quietly, exposing their true intentions without me needing to raise my voice. I realized then that revenge didn't always require dramatic displays or loud victories. Sometimes the strongest revenge is patience and keeping what's rightfully yours. And in that moment, I knew we had not just survived, but thrived, leaving a legacy of quiet power and moral triumph that would endure.